4:47 on a Friday morning, while most of Britain still slept beneath the darkness of winter, Buckingham Palace released a statement so final and devastating that even seasoned royal correspondents, long accustomed to decoding careful language and diplomatic phrasing, stared at their screens in stunned disbelief. His Majesty, the King's medical team has advised that treatment is no longer effective. The King is receiving end-of-life care at Windsor Castle. The royal family has been informed and is gathering at His Majesty's bedside. 29 words, no softening, no false hope. Only the brutal truth that King Charles III, who had waited 7 decades to wear the crown and had worn it for barely 3 years, was dying. The announcement came without warning, without the familiar sequence of reassuring health updates that usually prepare a nation for a royal death. One moment the official line insisted the king was receiving ongoing treatment, managing his condition, and maintaining limited duties. The next, the palace confirmed what everyone feared but no one dared to say aloud. Charles was in his final hours, with no recovery, no miraculous improvement, and no gentle decline that might have granted his family years instead of days. The BBC interrupted early morning programming within seconds, the presenter's voice faltering slightly as she read the words to a nation waking to the end of its second Elizabethan age and the beginning of something new, uncertain, and infinitely sadder. Sky News activated full protocols, pre-prepared graphics appearing on screens with a speed that felt almost obscene. In the United States, where it was still late Thursday night, CNN's breaking news alert cut through primetime programming with a starkness that made even American anchors pause before speaking. Outside Windsor Castle, the first mourners arrived before sunrise, ghost-like in the pre-dawn darkness, drawn by a grief they could not fully explain and a need to witness history they had hoped would not come so soon. An elderly woman who had waited 15 hours to view Queen Elizabeth's coffin now stood at the gates with tears streaming down her face. "He barely had any time," she whispered. "He waited his whole life, and they gave him barely any time at all." Inside Kensington Palace, William had been awake since 3:30, after a sleepless night following a call from Windsor's senior physician warning that Charles's condition had deteriorated sharply. The official statement confirmed what that private call had prepared him for, but seeing the words in stark black text on his phone made it real in a way the late-night update had not. His father was dying. Not eventually, not in theory. But now, Catherine found him standing at the window of his study, still wearing the clothes from the previous day, staring into a darkness that had not yet given way to dawn. She did not ask if he was all right. The question was meaningless. Instead, she stood beside him, her hand finding his, offering the only comfort possible when comfort itself felt insufficient. "The children," William said at last, his voice rough with tears shed in private. "They need to say goodbye, George especially. He's old enough to understand, old enough to regret it forever if we don't let him." Catherine nodded, already preparing herself to wake their children before sunrise and tell them their grandfather was dying, that they needed to leave immediately, that this might be the last time they saw him alive. "I'll wake them," she said softly. "You call ahead. Let Windsor know we're coming." Within 20 minutes, the Wales family was in a convoy racing through empty London streets toward Windsor, protection officers pushing limits they would never normally cross, while George sat in silence, staring ahead. Tinted windows looked out on a city that felt foreign in the pre-dawn darkness. Charlotte cried quietly, her face pressed into Catherine's shoulder, while Louis, too young to grasp the permanence of what lay ahead, clutched his mother's hand and kept asking when they would arrive. At Windsor, Princess Anne had remained through the night, never leaving after the first call warning of Charles's deterioration. She watched her brother drift in and out of consciousness, held his hand during fleeting moments of clarity when he seemed to recognize her, and stood by as the medical team finally acknowledged what they had long avoided. There was nothing more to be done. Treatment had failed. The cancer had won, leaving only pain management and the hope of preserving what dignity could still be found in death. Camilla had not left Charles's side since the previous afternoon, when his breathing became labored and his moments of wakefulness shorter and more confused. She sat beside him, holding his hand, speaking softly even when he could not reply, because presence was all she had left to give. The Queen Consort, who had endured decades of public criticism to stand beside him, now faced the cruelest irony of all. She would lose him just as the life they had waited so long to share had barely begun. As dawn broke over Windsor Castle, bathing the ancient stone in pink and gold that felt obscenely beautiful given what was unfolding inside, the royal family gathered for the vigil every family dreads but none can escape: the waiting, the watching, the unbearable passage of time when someone you love is dying and all you can do is bear witness to their leaving. To understand how the palace reached this moment of devastating finality, one must return 72 hours earlier, when Charles's condition, though serious, still carried the possibility of stabilization. The medical team, led by Dr. Sarah Chen and supported by specialists from across Europe, had pursued aggressive treatments that bought time at a brutal cost. But on Tuesday afternoon, during what should have been a routine checkup, monitoring equipment revealed something deeply alarming. Charles's organ function was declining far faster than predicted. The cancer, once thought contained, had metastasized in ways imaging had failed to detect. What had been treated as manageable had become acute and irreversible. An emergency consultation was convened. Dr. Chen presented the findings with clinical precision, and everyone understood their meaning. This was no longer chronic illness. It was end-stage disease. Professor Michael Hartley, the senior oncologist, spoke the words no one else would. They needed to discuss palliative care and prepare the family for days, not weeks or months. That evening, Dr. Chen explained to Charles that treatment was no longer working, that his body was failing despite every effort, and that the focus must shift from cure to comfort. He listened with a composure that broke her heart, asking practical questions about timelines and symptoms. "How long?" he asked at last. "Days. Perhaps a week if we are fortunate. The decline will likely be rapid." Charles nodded slowly. He asked to speak with William, saying there were things that had to be said, arrangements to be made, constitutional matters that could not wait for sentiment. That conversation took place late Tuesday night behind closed doors. Those nearby reported raised voices, then long silences, then unmistakable weeping. When William emerged nearly 2 hours later, his face was ravaged by tears, his composure utterly broken. He collapsed into Catherine's arms, his grief so raw that even hardened protection officers looked away. By Wednesday morning, Charles's decline had accelerated. He remained conscious but increasingly confused, drifting between awareness and disorientation. Camilla felt his grip weaken, his replies slow and sometimes nonsensical. Doctors confirmed the cancer had begun affecting his neurological function. Wednesday afternoon brought the first true crisis. Charles suffered what doctors carefully described as an acute episode, his heart briefly stopping before emergency intervention stabilized him. Dr. Chen later explained to Camilla, with devastating gentleness, that such episodes would become more frequent, that one would eventually come they could not reverse, and that the time to gather family was now. Thursday passed in long stretches of unconsciousness, broken only by brief moments of confused wakefulness. During one lucid moment, Charles asked for Anne, who came at once. "Tell William," he managed. "Tell him it's not a burden, it's a gift. Tell him I was proud every day." And gripped his hand, tears streaming down her face, and promised she would. By Thursday evening, Charles had entered what the medical team described as the active dying phase. His breathing grew labored and irregular, his moments of consciousness shorter and further apart, his body finally surrendering. Dr. Chen, her voice heavy with emotion, made the call to the communications team. "Prepare the statement. The king was dying, and the nation had to be told." 4:47 on Friday morning, time to reach early news broadcasts so the country would wake to the truth rather than be confronted by it without warning. As Britain stirred into consciousness, the royal family gathered at Windsor to witness an ending no amount of preparation could make bearable. The emergency summons went out at 3:32 that morning, carefully coded messages that still carried unmistakable urgency. "Come immediately, final hours, no delays." Protocols existed for this moment, but nothing could capture the human weight of waking loved ones before dawn to tell them someone they cherished was dying. William was already awake, sleep impossible. When his phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for palace emergencies, he knew before answering. "How long?" he asked at once. "Hours at most," Sir Clive Alderton replied. "Dr. Chen advises you return as soon as possible, and if the children wish to say goodbye, now is the time. He may not be conscious much longer." The drive to Windsor felt endless and yet far too short. George sat rigidly upright, trying to embody the stoic strength he believed a future king should show, though his hands trembled. Charlotte had stopped crying, slipping into a numbness beyond tears. Louis kept asking questions no one could fully answer. Would Grandpa know they were there? Would it hurt? Why couldn't the doctors fix him? Catherine answered with careful honesty. "Sometimes bodies become so sick that medicine cannot make them better. Grandpa's body is very, very sick, and the doctors have done everything they can. Now we are going to be with him, to hold his hand and let him know how much we love him." At Windsor, Princess Anne spent the hour making calls to extended family, her voice growing hoarser with each conversation. Edward and Sophie were already en route from Bagshot Park. Beatrice and Eugenie were notified, though the palace quietly suggested their presence might create crowding at a time when immediate family needed space. The most difficult call was to Harry in California, where it was still Thursday evening, and reached him on his mobile. "You need to come now," she said bluntly. "Flights won't arrive in time. Speak with the palace about private transport. Your father is dying, Harry. If you want to say goodbye, You must leave immediately. Harry's journey would become its own tragedy, a race against time he would ultimately lose. Even with private aircraft and priority clearances, the reality of transatlantic travel meant he would not arrive until late Friday afternoon, hours after the moment he was desperately trying to reach. The medical suite had been transformed into a space balancing clinical necessity with family intimacy. Monitoring equipment hummed softly in the corners. Chairs were arranged around Charles's bed for immediate family, the lighting dimmed to something gentler than institutional glare. Camilla had not left his side since the statement's release. She sat close, one hand holding his, the other resting on his chest to feel each labored breath. Her face was etched with exhaustion and grief, makeup long since cried away. When William arrived with Catherine and the children, Camilla looked up, eyes full of pain. "He's been waiting for you," she said quietly. "He drifts in and out, but when he's conscious, he asks for you." William approached slowly, almost afraid of what he would see. Charles lay propped against pillows, his face pale and drawn, his breathing shallow and uneven. Yet when William took his hand, Charles's eyes fluttered open and a moment of clarity pierced the fog. "William," he managed. "You came." "Of course I came," William replied, tears flowing freely. "I'm here, Dad." "We're all here." Charles's gaze moved slowly around the room, lingering longest on his grandchildren. George stepped forward and took his grandfather's hand. "We love you, Grandpa," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for everything." Surrounded by family in the pre-dawn darkness, King Charles III seemed to find a peace that had eluded him through the long night of decline. His breathing, though still labored, became slightly more regular, his expression softening into something close to contentment. He was not alone. He would not die alone. As dawn broke fully over Windsor Castle, Charles drifted more frequently between consciousness and confusion. The clear moments grew shorter, the haze deeper. But when awareness returned, he was determined to use whatever time remained for words that mattered. During one final period of clarity, he gripped William's hand with surprising strength and drew him closer. "You'll be a better king than I was," he said. Each word Charles spoke required effort, painful to witness. "You've had time to prepare that I never had. Time to watch, to learn, to understand what works and what doesn't. Don't waste it trying to be me. Be yourself. Be the king this century needs, not the one my mother's era required." William could not speak. Words lodged in his throat. He simply nodded and held on, as if physical contact alone could tether his father to life a little longer. Catherine knelt beside the bed. "Thank you," she said softly, "for welcoming me into this family, for believing I could do this, for supporting us through everything. I'll take care of him. I'll take care of all of them. I promise." Charles's expression softened into something approaching a smile. "I know you will. You're stronger than you know, both of you. Strong enough for what comes next." His gaze moved to the children. "George," he called weakly. The boy stepped forward, composure cracking. "Yes, Grandpa. Being king isn't about the crown or the throne or the ceremonies. It's about service, about using whatever power you have to make life better for people with less power than you. Remember that. When the weight feels unbearable, remember that service is what gives it meaning." George nodded, tears streaming. "I'll remember, I promise." Charlotte and Louis came forward next, and Charles spoke to each in hushed words meant only for their ears. Private gifts of love delivered in whispers. Anne, who had maintained composure all morning, allowed emotion to show when Charles called her name. She moved to his side. "I'm here," she said simply. "You were always the strongest," Charles told her. "The one who understood duty without being taught. I relied on that. William will too. Don't let him forget to lean on you when he needs to." "I won't," Anne promised, voice rough with unshed tears. "Rest now. We'll take care of everything." Camilla remained beside the bed, her hands never leaving Charles's. When the family finished their goodbyes, she leaned close, speaking softly so no one else could hear. Charles seemed to relax after her words, as if permission had been granted to stop fighting, to let go. His breathing slowed. Pauses between breaths grew longer. Dr. Chen approached William quietly. "Your Royal Highness," she said softly, "it's time. The next few minutes, perhaps an hour at most, you should all be close." The family gathered around the bed, each finding a position to maintain physical contact. George stood beside William. Charlotte pressed against Catherine. Louis stood silently, eyes wide, and positioned herself at the foot of the bed. Camilla remained in her chair, both hands holding his. Outside the suite, palace staff assembled in corridors. Constitutional officials prepared documents. Communications teams reviewed statements. Across Britain, people waited, aware that history was unfolding within Windsor Castle. Inside, time seemed to slow. Charles's breathing grew labored, each inhalation a visible effort. His eyes remained closed, but fingers occasionally tightened around Camilla's or William's hand. At 8:43 a.m., Charles drew a breath that rattled in his chest. The pause that followed stretched longer than before. Another shallow, weaker breath. Another pause, even longer. And then, almost imperceptibly, he stopped. King Charles III was gone. Dr. Chen stepped forward, checked for vital signs she knew would not be found, then looked at William and shook her head. "I'm sorry. His Majesty has passed." Camilla collapsed, body racked with sobs. Anne's face crumpled. Catherine pulled the children close. William felt the weight of kingship settle onto him like a physical force. He was no longer the Prince of Wales. He was no longer the heir. He had become King William V. Sir Clive Alderton approached with formality that felt surreal. "Your Majesty," he said, the title landing like a blow. "I am deeply sorry for your loss. When you're ready, there are immediate constitutional matters requiring your attention. When a reign ends..." The minutes following Charles's death moved with terrible efficiency, leaving no room for grief. William, now King William V, stood frozen beside his father as the machinery of constitutional transition activated with ruthless precision. Protocols dictated every step, centuries of tradition guiding the response to a monarch's death. Dr. Chen officially pronounced the time of death at 8:43 a.m., her voice steady despite tears. His Majesty King Charles III passed peacefully, surrounded by family. Clinical language could never capture the gravity of what had unfolded, but it created the official record that would stand. Camilla, still seated beside the bed, refused to let go of Charles's hand, even as palace staff moved quietly around the room. "I need a moment," she whispered, voice broken. "Please, just a moment more," and moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder, and together they sat in silence as the woman who had been queen consort said a private goodbye. Sir Clive Alderton, carrying a leather portfolio of emergency constitutional documents, approached with careful respect. "Your Majesty," he began, the title sounding strange and foreign. "The Prime Minister has been notified and requests an audience. There are documents requiring immediate signature, including the accession proclamation." William looked at him blankly, his mind unable to shift from mourning his father to managing a constitutional crisis. Catherine stepped forward. "Give him 10 minutes, she said firmly. "His father just died." The crown can wait 10 minutes. Yet everyone understood the crown could not truly wait. The moment Charles drew his final breath, William became king. There was no gap, no transition. The legal continuity of the monarchy demanded it. Anne, ever practical, took charge of the children. "They need to leave," she said quietly to Catherine. "They've said their goodbyes. They don't need to be here for what comes next." Catherine gathered George, Charlotte, and Louis, all stunned into silence. George moved like a sleepwalker, trying to process not only his grandfather's death but the knowledge that his father was now king. Charlotte clung to her mother, face buried against her side, while Louis, finally realizing something terrible and permanent had occurred, began to cry with a raw grief only young children can express. Once the children were escorted from the room, William stepped away from his father's bedside to face Sir Clive. "What needs to happen first?" he asked, voice hollow yet functional. Sir Clive opened his portfolio. "First, you will meet with the Accession Council later today. Before that, you must approve the announcement of His Majesty's death." William read the prepared statement. Simple, direct, devastatingly final. He signed it with a trembling hand, authorizing the message that would plunge Britain into mourning. The statement was released at 9:15, 32 minutes after Charles's death, and within seconds, every major news outlet interrupted programming. Millions across Britain received alerts on their phones. King Charles III is dead. At Windsor Castle, William was led to a private study to meet the Accession Council. Constitutional experts briefed him on ceremonies, proclamations, and oaths he would swear. And joined him. "You need to call Harry," she said quietly. "He should hear it from you, not from a statement or the news." William almost forgot that his brother was somewhere over the Atlantic, racing desperately to reach a bedside he would never reach in time. When Harry answered, voice tight with hope and fear, William delivered words no brother should ever speak. "Harry, I'm so sorry. He's gone. Dad died about an hour ago. You didn't make it in time." The sound through the phone was somewhere between a sob and a wail, raw grief unfiltered by distance or protocol. "I was trying," Harry said finally. "I was trying so hard to get there." "I know," William replied, tears falling. "He knew you were coming. We told him it mattered." When the call ended, William sat for a moment in the quiet study, allowing one final minute as a son who had lost his father, before returning to the corridor where duty and crown waited with implacable patience. Long live the king. By mid-morning, Windsor Castle had transformed into the operational center of a constitutional transition that resembled controlled chaos. The Accession Council assembled in the throne room with remarkable speed. William entered in a dark suit rather than ceremonial regalia, face ravaged by grief, eyes red from tears, yet posture straight and voice steady as he spoke the required words acknowledging his accession. "I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty which have now passed to me," he read, Catherine beside him. "In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set." His voice cracked slightly on inspiring example, a brief reveal of the son grieving beneath the sovereign. Privy Council members swore allegiance to the new king, each intoning, "I do become your liege man of life and limb," the medieval phrasing carrying weight precisely because of its antiquity. Outside Windsor, crowds had swelled to thousands. Flowers piled against the gates, messages of condolence accumulating as part of history. An elderly veteran stood at attention over an hour, tears streaming. The formal proclamation of William's accession took place at 11:30, precisely 2 hours and 47 minutes after Charles's death. The Garter, King of Arms, read the proclamation from St. James's Palace, voice carrying across a silent, grieving crowd. The proclamation was repeated across the United Kingdom, each ceremony marking the constitutional reality that Britain had a new sovereign, whether the nation felt ready or not. Back at Windsor, William faced his first address to the nation as king. The speech had been drafted weeks earlier, but no preparation could lessen the moment's brutality. Alone in a temporary broadcast studio, he spoke to a nation mourning alongside him. "I speak to you today as your king, though I wish with all my heart I were speaking to you as a son who still had his father. My father, King Charles III, died peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle, surrounded by family. He knew he was loved, and he faced the end with the courage and grace that defined his life. My father dedicated his life to service, cared deeply about the future of our planet and the welfare of all people. He waited longer than any heir in British history to become king. And when that moment came, he embraced it with complete dedication." The camera captured his tears, the tremor in his voice, the weight settling onto his shoulders. His time as sovereign had been brief, yet in those years he showed what it means to serve with integrity, lead with compassion, and face the hardest challenges with dignity. When the broadcast ended, William remained seated, staring at nothing. Catherine entered, silently pulled him into an embrace, allowing him to stop performing. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. "You can," Catherine replied. "You will, because you don't have a choice and because you're stronger than you know. But not today. Today, you grieve." Both understood that the crown allowed no real days off. Kingship had claimed William the moment his father's heart stopped. By evening, the immediate constitutional crisis had been managed. William had been proclaimed king across all realms. Government continuity was confirmed. The machinery of state adapted efficiently to its new sovereign. In private apartments, the royal family gathered in grief that protocol could not manage. Camilla sat alone in rooms no longer hers, and arranged with funeral directors, while William sat with his children, explaining that although their grandfather was gone, his love remained. George, old enough to understand that his father's accession changed his own future, asked the haunting question, "Does this mean I'll have to be king one day, even sooner than we thought?" William pulled him close. "Yes," he said honestly, "one day, probably sooner than either of us would choose. But not today. Today, we remember Grandpa. Tomorrow, and every day after, we'll figure out together how to carry what he left us." The nation entered 10 days of mourning. Flags flew at half-mast across the Commonwealth, and King William V faced the impossible task of being both a son grieving his father and a sovereign serving his people. From which country are you watching this transition? Share your perspective below, for the death of a monarch resonates differently worldwide. Thank you for bearing witness, for understanding that crowns cannot shield against mortality, and that sometimes the greatest burden is the grief carried beneath it.